Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our series, Lean Into Your Faith, Meeting Professional Challenges with Spiritual Resources. This is a webinar series that's hosted by the Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership at the Institute for Global Engagement. And my name is Kristen Lundquist. I'm the program director for the Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership. The Lean Into Your Faith series was actually launched this past August. So this is our second webinar in this series and features the wisdom rather, of professional women who have achieved a high level of leadership and have led from the foundation of their faith. These women, hailing from many different sectors, disciplines, and faith backgrounds, have encountered some different challenges and yet have ultimately triumphed over them. So they come to our series to share their experience along with some helpful tools, which women of faith can utilize their effort to do a few different things: build confidence, live out their faith, and pursue their personal and professional passions for global change. And today we are so honored we have Miss Kit Bigelow to talk with us about faith as armor, spiritual practices to strengthen daily professional resiliency. And I'm just going to provide an introduction for Kit because her background is just so dynamic and impressive here. Kit served as the Director of External Affairs for the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the U.S. for 25 years. Kit had overall responsibility for the functioning of the Washington-based Office of External Affairs and the New York office of the U.S. Baha'i Representative to the UN, as well as the Baha'i Refugee Office and the Office of Public Information until their integration into other agencies of the National Assembly. For 8 years, she was the co-chair of the National Working Group for U.S. ratification of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. She was actively involved in the U.S. ratification of the UN Genocide Convention, the Convention Against Torture, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention Against Racial Discrimination. Kit serves on the advisory board of the Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership of the Institute for Global Engagement. She also serves on the executive steering committee of the Women in International Law Interest Group of the American Society of International Law and has served as its co-chair. She is a member of the Women's Foreign Policy Group and the Women in International Security Group. It was co-founder and co-chair of the Washington-based Working Group on the Human Rights of Women, and she was a founder and treasurer of the board of directors of U.S. Women Connect. She also served on the board of directors for Citizens for Global Solutions and on the advisory board of the Mona Foundation and Wateo, the Women and Environment Organization operating in Iraq. Ms. Bigelow, Kit, received the 2014 Interfaith Bridge Builders Award for the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington. In 2011, she received the National Award from the International Religious Liberty Association. She holds a degree from Smith College and an MBA in International Business from Georgetown University. And you can find out much more about Kit and her work at kitbigelow.com. And so with that introduction, I just wanted to say a word about the format for today's session for our participants and those tuning in. Kit will be presenting for approximately 20 minutes, at which time she'll engage with participants for Q&A via the chat box below. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to chat them in, or type them rather, into the chat box, and we'll keep a running tally of the questions. If you're tuning into this recording and you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email them to klundquist, LUNDQUIST, @globalengage.org, and I will be happy to pass them on to Kit. With that, I will turn it over to you, Kit. Please take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kristen. I hope everyone is able to hear me. And even though I cannot see you, I really welcome you and am so happy that you had the chance to participate today. Uh, would those who are our participants be willing to put into the chat box a little bit about themselves? What is it that you do on a daily basis? Why are you interested in this topic? And share with us so we know who we all are on this conversation today. And the format will be very straightforward, I hope, as Kristen just said. And I will speak for a short while as we are sharing with one another by chat. Please, if you have something to say at any time, feel free to put it into the chat box. And I very much hope it will be interactive once I've presented a few ideas that we can learn from each other. I'm particularly interested to know from all of you what you do to assist yourselves on a daily basis in order to have faith as your armor and the ways that you deal with your professional lives. So I hope this will be very, very informative for all of us, and it's not intended to be a one-way street in any way. Just a few ideas that can seed the conversation. And so as Kristen and I, in fact, at the earlier part of the summer, began to discuss what might be a topic that would resonate with individuals who either are in the faith community in a professional way, as I was for 2.5 decades, but most of us, in fact, are people of faith, of different faiths and denominations, and we work for organizations that are not faith based, and we often have challenges as we are going about our business, working with others, being managers, being employees, and putting into practice those principles and values that underpin our spiritual lives. That's the point of our discussion today. And I put it together in a format where we would talk about our daily practices. And these were practices that I gleaned from my own faith tradition, which is the Baha'i faith, as well as, of course, contact with individuals who are of many different religions, mostly Jews and Christians and Muslims, and learned from them too how they are able to strengthen their faith and be able to act in ways that exemplify their faith practices on a daily basis. So I offer these to you as practices that I've learned over a period of many, many years, and in fact, do them each day. Some of you may do yoga, and I do yoga, and I have also found that the understanding from yoga that there are energy centers in our body that go from the what's called the crown chakra all the way down to the sacral chakra. These energy centers, if this is something that is familiar to you, you will see that the practices that I'm going to be talking about today particularly relate to the heart chakra and the throat chakra and the uh, third eye or middle of your head chakra and the crown chakra. And so for those who are engaged and involved or familiar with that system, you will understand what I am speaking about. And so I want to welcome those. Thank you for sharing, Zach, about yourself. And I understand well the stresses and anxieties and challenges that go on a daily basis as we are in our workplaces. So the first practice I want to describe is one that I found to be most valuable and useful in the very first part of the morning and the very end of the day. It's not intended to be a pun, but it's like a bookend, as you can see the books. But all all of the religions have Holy Scripture, writings, and it is my experience that delving into those writings, the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Torah and Old Testament, the Baha'i writings, in fact, is essential because not only does it uh, provide for us the transformative and the creative word of God, but it is actually probably, I have found, the most significant and important element of the armor that we need on a daily basis to help us create that resilience, which takes place over time and through the experiences we have and the challenges that we face and making our mistakes and then coming back and learning. But it also, in every instance, the very words of the Holy Scriptures, whatever they may be that we turn to, in fact, lay out for us the very human beings that we are trying to be. And because most of us work in situations, I don't know anybody, in fact, including myself, who has had the joy and privilege of working in a situation where absolutely every single person is making a conscious effort to work at his highest or her highest spiritual potential. So every single situation has more or less challenge to it as we rub up against those individuals who, in fact, have no spiritual foundation and do not desire to have one, and therefore they're not adhering to any particular value system that would be of benefit to a whole organization. And it is, I found, this daily immersion for however long a period of time is possible that in fact creates the capacity to be able to step back just enough from a situation that is challenging, a situation that can trigger our own desire to act in ways that are less spiritually mature, that are less in adherence to the values that we have in our scripture of honesty and trustworthiness, uh, not backbiting and gossiping, creating unity instead of division, all of those things that are required for a strong and fully functioning workplace. And so over the years, I actually adjusted my alarm clock. Uh, wasn't always happy about it, but found that it was worth the practice to get up earlier in the morning, 15 minutes, a half hour, even before I started the rest of my day, so that I would have time for this practice. And going along with the reading and the study of whatever scripture or inspirational readings might be part of your library, whatever poetry and works you might have from from mystics or from others who speak particularly to your soul is, of course, the prayer and the meditation, the request from God for the assistance for that day, and also the meditation on what it is that we're reading. And I have found also that the meditation is particularly relevant when there is a challenge at work, which we'll be talking a little bit more about in a couple of the future slides. So we've put on our armor in terms of the daily practice of reading and studying, pondering, praying, meditating. And as I referenced the chakras earlier, I think of this as feeding our soul and our heart right here in order that we are then able to act with courage, which means to act with heart, and be able to speak out, which is our throat chakra. And so as we go into our day, the resilience and the armor requires us in so many circumstances to be able to address the situations that face us with an understanding about when to act, when not to act, when to speak and when not to speak. But when we do speak, to act on spiritual principles of honesty, trustworthiness, kindness, openness, transparency, those spiritual virtues that have been part of every religious tradition, every book that has ever been sent to humanity. And all of us know how extraordinarily difficult that can be, especially in circumstances where the behavior of those around us not only doesn't reflect those particular values, but when individuals are consciously and deliberately, in fact, trying to undermine and to create problems, whatever their self-interest may be, whatever their self-absorption may be. And so I find it's this constant loop of returning to what I have read, studied, pondered, taking a step back, maybe taking a breath, saying a prayer, and then being able to hold my ground. Now, I just wanted to share with you one example because we each will have different examples depending upon what our professional lives are and what the work is that we do specifically and the venues that we work in. Christian mentioned that I'd had the chance to work in Washington for many years. The agencies of the U.S. government that I worked with most frequently were the Congress and the White House and the State Department. I also did a lot of work at the United Nations. And so it was very much a diplomatic arena. But being here in Washington, D.C., and particularly as we worked with Congress, which was an incredibly wonderful experience, and so many of the people I met there are still friends and colleagues. But I wanted to share from a story that had to do with my particular experience as a Baha'i. And I know that this spiritual teaching does not apply to all faith traditions, but I thought it might be illustrative, and it has certainly stuck in my mind, even though it happened probably 15 years ago. One of the teachings for the Baha'i faith is non-involvement in partisan politics. Baha'is very much are engaged in the world, they vote, but we do not identify with political parties, whether it's here in the United States or Canada, Europe, Africa, South America, Asia, doesn't matter. And so you might imagine that in our context here in Washington, that can be and has been challenging because our engine, especially our congressional engine, is very much built around the um, identification with parties. And so much of the work that I did was involved with religious freedom, with informing members of Congress about what was happening to Baha'is in Iran, in Egypt, and other countries where they were experiencing persecution. And we learned frequently that there would be expectations that we would have a quid pro quo, that there would be the uh, expectation that if a member of Congress were going to support the issue of the violation of human rights of the Baha'is in Iran, that in fact that the expectation was is that we would support the campaign or come out and endorse that candidate. And so I learned very quickly, and it wasn't always easy. And there were times when individuals would literally turn their backs and walk away from me in the middle of a sentence because I had to be able to state to them that we were unable to support their candidate in the way that we were being asked to do, but we appreciated any individual member of Congress's support and hoped that he or she might be able to speak out for the human rights principle itself. And so I mention that because at the time that one of the staff people did literally turn her back on me and walk away, I remember feeling so stunned and not really knowing what to do at that moment. And it struck me that certainly in the position I was in as a representative of of my faith community, the main representative in Washington, that I certainly didn't have a choice at one level about what to do. But I understood at a deeper and more emotional level what it meant to be able to act on a level of spiritual principle, even when it meant losing the support in that instance of that member of Congress. And that there are times that we need to adhere to the principle, despite what could be perceived as a negative outcome. The next the next idea I wish to share is taking up the end of the day and actually would involve our minds and as well as our hearts, and that is the practice of reviewing and analyzing each day, each evening, and personal reflection on what has transpired. I think all of us are only too aware of how full and our lives are, how incredibly packed our schedules are. One of the things that is evident to each of us is how deliberate these practices have to be, and that we need often to change something in our schedules and in the way that we are living our lives in order to incorporate and include enough time and enough space. And I think of space as a spiritual and mental space and emotional space in order to incorporate these practices. But as we take time to review and analyze our day and to think about those very experiences that took place, especially those that are causing us heartache, challenge, really keeping us awake at night, making us wake up in the middle of the night as we think about things that may be going on with staff, maybe going on with our bosses, might be going on with the whole organization. Uh, and we have time to think about what are the spiritual principles and values that are inherent, that are a part of these very tests, these very challenges, or even to think about those things, of course, that have gone very well, and to realize how we might be ourselves growing and changing. And something that was really a challenge and difficult for us 6 months ago or a year ago, that in fact we can see how we have evolved, how we have matured, and be able to give ourselves some credit for the spiritual evolution that we have. Now, the last slide before we have a chance for some discussion together is that as important, I think, as it is for us to have our own personal quiet reflection in the night, at the end of the day, as we think about what we'd like to do a little bit better tomorrow than we were able to do today, or how we're going to handle that particular challenge with a staff person, is that we don't have to do all of that alone. And so part of this cycle is the opportunity for us to consult with our friends, our family, colleagues, mentors, people we trust, people who we know have similar outlooks or values that whose opinions we value, and so that we can talk to them as well about those things that are taking place in our lives, and get their ideas, work with them, ask them to assist us. And so it's not just our own personal reflection, but it is also the consultation and advice that comes to us from our trusted mentors and colleagues and friends. And so I will stop here because those were the basics of a daily practice that I have found has been extraordinarily fruitful. And I look forward to hearing from you about what you're doing in your own daily practice, what kinds of challenges that you face. And for those that have had the chance to join us since we started talking, I hope that you will share with us as well in the chat box a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what field you work in, and what kinds of questions you have. So please, let's open this up to the chats and the sharing. And I thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you so much, Kit. I'm going to give people some time to type their questions into the chat box here. And so I'll take the privilege of the first question to get out of the gate here. So I'm really curious. You mentioned, Kit, often in our professional environments that we rub up against individuals who don't have the same faith background or values that we do. And I'm specifically curious about cultivating resiliency and faith in the midst of anger or deception. So in the Christian tradition, in the book of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16, there's a passage that says, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves. Be as innocent as doves and as shrewd as snakes. And so I'm just really curious on your perspective, specifically on the shrewd as snakes comment. How do you strike that balance, and what does shrewdness mean from a faith standpoint in the midst of maybe situations of anger or deception from your colleagues?
That's great, Kristen. Let's and thank you for a meaty example. Uh, Immediately, the shrewdness that you mentioned from the verse in Matthew strikes me as wisdom, and it is a capacity for us to be able to label or first recognize, understand, and then label the reality of what is taking place. One of the greatest challenges I found, and I'm just speaking about myself as a younger individual as I started out in my professional life, and armed with my faith understanding, I will admit that I had some very rose colored glasses. And speaking of that biblical verse of being as you know at like sheep, and the purity and the meekness, the calmness, the kindness of the animals that are evoked. I know that there were times that I did not correctly label because I felt that I was not being true to being a spiritual person if I saw another person as acting in an evil, or certainly in a manner that was destructive. I think that the challenge, uh, while holding ourselves to account for a level of spiritual values and behaviors, we have to be as shrewd and wise as the metaphor of that snake in order to see that the individuals around us are not adhering to the same values. And in fact, their behavior can, in an organizational sense, in any collective sense, be ultimately destructive. From my own faith tradition, there's a very powerful verse that says that to pretend that we don't recognize that somebody is lying or acting in a destructive manner encourages that individual to continue with his or her behavior, and that it will be ultimately destructive. So that it calls us to be very clear. Doesn't mean unkind, I don't take it as unkind, but it calls us to be very clear, especially in a circumstance where others are affected and involved, to let that person know and to set up a boundary, to set up a means by which that behavior can be either stopped, or the person can be, if I'm a boss, which I directed an office for a long time, and I would simply just call that person to my office and we'd have to deal with it. And so that's what it means. I'd be eager to hear from you or from anybody else too about your thoughts about that question that Kristen posed, or any other question people might have too. Thank you, Kristen.
Of course. Of course. Thank you, Kit, so much for that answer. Um, so I see that Courtney is typing down here at the bottom, and it looks like her question just came through. Um, she asks, my question is about faith and career transitions. How have you, during your job changes, been able to handle the stresses and uncertainties with each transition? How has your faith been tested and strengthened in all your career transitions? What would your recommendations be for someone in this season?
Mm. I think, thank you, Courtney. Uh, I think at any transition uh, of our lives, whether it's a personal transition or a work transition, it comes with the stress and uncertainty that you've identified, and it's a test no matter what, because the the unknown uh, has always this element of fear and certainly hope that it will work out fine, that it'll be better or at least as good as what we have now. Uh, and uh, and I think that one of the things about what we're talking about today is that faith and our gift really that we have faith is a direct uh, assistance to our ability to handle the unknown. And don't mean in any way that I have learned how completely to get rid of the fear of the uncertainty and the kind uh, of challenge that comes with any transition. But faith and knowing that there is uh, uh, power in God, or whichever name we give to the power of the creator of the universe and all that is in it, that we know that ultimately it is our highest good that is going to be addressed. And so part of the question too is in this you're not specific in terms of the stresses and uncertainties, but sometimes we don't know even if we're making the right decision. uh, Maybe we've been in a job and we're thinking that it's time to leave and go to a new one, but we're not even sure about the timing. We're not even sure that whatever has not been good or seems completed in the one we have, we should go to a new one. And so I would just offer that these very practices that we just talked about, particularly this last one that we still have up on our screen here about consulting with our friends and colleagues, can be hugely helpful so we don't feel so alone. I mean, not only do we pour our hearts out in prayer and read each day as a buttress, but we also can consult. But inevitably, trusting and faith can help with the inevitable uncertainty and the stress that comes along with any transition. And if this is your circumstance right now, I really very much hope that you will be very much strengthened. And I look back. I think we all look back. You asked about my own transitions. We can all easily look back and say, well, this is what happened 5 years ago, and we know now what the outcome has been. And but I spent also sleepless nights, days in prayer, and handled it as with this daily practice and these very tasks and these very activities that I've just described. And now I can see that all those transitions, of course, have worked out, but at the time, uh, it was definitely a challenge, and I had to take that literal leap of faith.
Thank
I
you.
hope that addresses a little bit.
Wonderful. And I see Courtney's probably typing a response here, and it looks like Marina's also typing a question. Right, Courtney. Looks like that answered her question, Kit. Well, while
Good.
Marina is typing her question, I actually have another one. You were talking about consulting with colleagues, um, and I'm really curious, just based on your experience with some of these spiritual practices that you've mentioned during your presentation. Um, how do you approach or seek wisdom on sometimes that tricky border between consultation and gossip in the workplace? So, how do
Hmm.
you use your faith to kind of guide you in creating healthy boundaries in that area?
Another great question. Thank you, everybody. I found that in my experience, the first question I had to ask myself was whether or not in a collegial way this individual was in an appropriate part of the organizational chart for me to be discussing this issue. And if the person was not, but happened to be someone I loved and admired and was a friend with, but let's say, I was director of my office. I was having an issue with one of the staff people. I had many other staff people who were on the same level as maybe the person I'm having trouble with. I knew that if I went to one of my other beloved colleagues who was on that same level and not directly related in any organizational way to helping me solve that problem as director, then it would fall into the realm of gossip. Uh, for many, many years, I was alone in the position. There was no assistant director. I had no administrative director. And so I relied very heavily on the individual who was my boss and my mentor. And it was he to whom I turned. And eventually, for the last 10 years of my being director of that office, I did have an administrative director as the office grew and we realized the challenges of the growth of the office. And so I was able to share with that person. But as tempting sometimes as it was, because I knew that other colleagues of mine were wise, that they could see also what was going on in the office. In fact, some of them had expressed concern. But as tempting as it was to rely on their insight, I knew that in that regard, inside the office, it was really important to make sure that I kept within the organizational definitions and job descriptions in order not to create any situation that would look like backbiting or gossip. So I hope that helps.
Very much. Thank you so much, Kit. Um, and it looks like Marina, your question came through, and so I'm just going to read it out for everybody. My question is, what would be a gracious way to deal with people who are deeply spiritual, but at the same time are intolerant towards other people's beliefs and lacking in social graces, especially in multicultural settings? I have a specific example in mind. At a conference on religion and citizenship I helped organize in a Central Asian country a few years ago, we had an issue with a Lutheran pastor who was a lovely individual, smart and engaging, but had an unfortunate knack for telling other non-Christian participants, in particular my young Jewish colleague, that they were undoubtedly going to hell. In that setting, where we had representatives of various faiths and ethnicities, it was most unfortunate.
Yes, it is. my heart really goes out to you and to the others in that room, and I have been in that position, and in fact, I'll share with you that I have even dealt with it in my own family, and because at a relatively young age, I became a Baha'i, and I have family members who often will say to me that they believe, as this Lutheran pastor did, that I'm going to hell. So I can very much sympathize and understand what the circumstances are. Uh, and uh, and you know, I have experienced the multi religious, multi faith context like this too. And if in fact you're the one with the microphone, along with the individual who is making such a comment. Uh, it is absolutely possible to say directly, and this is where I I go back here with our courage and principle of speaking out right here, and how walking that tightrope, but also whatever we say causes that drop with the ripples that go out, that we can address it publicly. To say that uh, that comment that was just made is not in the spirit of this conference, that we are of many faith backgrounds, we come from many different countries, and we appreciate that that the individual believes as he does, but the ground rules for this gathering are respect and tolerance and loving kindness toward each other as we are coming together. And if it's said one on one, as it may have actually been, and not in a public kind of way, but just to this colleague of yours who is Jewish, also, uh, I have found being able to say that and to a person directly, as I have done with my family members, uh, that uh, that that kind of statement not only is hurtful, but that from the perspective of the majority of people in the room is not even held as true. And so each circumstance, of course, will be different, but I think that like other instances of intolerance and prejudice that we experience around us, whether it's because of race, religion, sex, we are in a position to be able to speak to it lovingly and directly, depending upon what our position is and whether or not we have the capacity of the microphone and to speak. Again, Marina, I hope that that was helpful to you in some manner.
Wonderful. Looks like it was. Thank you, Kit. It looks like James is maybe typing a question, so I'm going to jump in with one of my own while he's typing. This is kind of a hard question.
Oh, the
What if
others weren't?
acting in line with our spiritual principles? Oh, I know I threw some hard ones at you, didn't I, Kit? Sorry about that. This one might be another hard one. I'm just wondering, what if acting in line with our spiritual principles leads to cost? So, what if we lose something? What's important to keep in mind in that circumstance?
Hmm.
And then it looks like James's question came through too, so I'll go ahead and read his out, and then maybe you can answer them both at the same time. He says, I was wondering if there are any organizational practices that you think would support women of faith employees in building their resiliency through their faith. Wonderful
Mhm,
question, James. Thank
mhm.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. I will address your question, Christian, and then thank you, James. I'll offer a couple of thoughts on yours as well. Uh, I used the example, my personal example of what happened with the member of Congress uh, as a way of showing that, in fact, I had acted on the spiritual teachings and principles of my own faith tradition, and and felt that I had lost something in the sense that the staff person with whom I had been working literally turned her back and walked away, and the office of that member of Congress didn't have anything to do with us after that. They were obviously very unhappy. So that's just of the call, or who might listen in the future, who participate in the Washington D.C. arena. But I think that it is inevitable that at some point, acting on a spiritual principle, even if it goes back to some of the examples that we talked about earlier of being able to recognize and address somebody who is acting in a particularly deceptive or uh, destructive manner, and being able to address that, might lose what had been a friendship, what might have been at least a relatively fruitful collegial relationship. I think that acting on spiritual principles through the period of our professional lives, inevitably there are going to be many losses. And and what I came to understand is, and I think that this will certainly speak to most of us who are listening today, is that the spiritual behavior and our understanding based on the holy books that we read are sources not just for this world, but for an eternal world. That there is a spiritual world that is alongside the material world that we are in, but we have souls that endure, souls that will live forever. And that, if it's not your particular belief, I'm sharing with you what is part of my faith tradition's understanding. So the loss can be perceived as temporary in the physical world. And at the end of that day, when I sit down at night and I review and analyze my day, I realize that I have done my best in that instance to rely on my understanding, my best understanding of the relevant, accurate, appropriate spiritual principles. And if, in fact, it appears to be a loss, or it appears, in fact, to have gotten completely turned around and not be a good situation at all, that's part of the reflection. Did I do what I felt I needed to do? And again, it goes back to another element of trust, such as what Courtney you were talking about earlier. It's a different element and aspect of knowing that we are going to at times have to make choices that will give the appearance of loss, but in fact, we have been able to provide a spiritual example. And like that ripple, we don't know ultimately what the impact of that behavior, that decision, that constancy in spiritual principle will achieve. And so uh, uh, I would say that sometimes it's the appearance of a loss, but even a real loss, we have to take heart that we have done the right thing spiritually. Obviously, if we haven't, then there's the need to make amends, to ask forgiveness, to be able to own our mistakes, and to be able to apologize. All of that's part of it too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kit. And then I think maybe just
We had,
James's question, and we'll make that our final question before we close out.
sure. Um, James, I certainly, as you can see, I chose some pictures with women because I thought that there might be mostly women as part of today's uh, discussion, and so I welcome you very very much, and to this table. And I think that in my own work experience, that when women really do support one another, and as you say, to support women of faith employees, I would turn that wording just a little bit, that we women, but also we men, have so much to gain and so much value from being much more open about supporting each other. Whether it is sharing lunches, even sharing occasions where we can study scripture together, or talking to one another as friends and colleagues about and when I say colleagues too, I don't mean people just within our own organizations, but those, and I treasure my friends who work in other organizations, and we learned so much from each other. And in fact, to this day, get together at least once a month, just to be able to talk as women of faith, and the challenges that we face in our various work situations. And so I have found that to be one of the most important aspects. But I would imagine that for men who would get together in a similar manner, to be able to share with each other, support each other, and have that level of trust and transparency as a small group or just one-on-one, would be unbelievably helpful. I know that I could not have done it over those years without having my peers, my women colleagues of faith, with whom I could have completely honest, trustworthy, and private conversations, and we really helped each other a lot.
Thank you so much, Kit. All of your answers to the questions have been incredibly helpful. And so I'm going to bring myself back up on webcam to just say just a very warm-hearted thank you so much for sharing your experience today, for fielding some of my difficult questions, and the great questions from the audience. We just really appreciate you and all of your wisdom and experience today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I cannot tell you how much I really appreciated everybody's questions, because they are tough. And each of us who is walking on this tightrope, uh, knows exactly how challenging it is in a world that is predominantly secular and does not give credence, let alone value, to acting on spiritual principle. We know how hard it can be. And so I reach out to you with all of you with great admiration for the work that you're doing every single day. And please know that you'll be part of my prayers and my reflections for your successes and your growth and your resilience.
Thank you so much, Kit. We really appreciate that. I do want to highlight a few things here as we close today. First of all, I just want to highlight Kit's website. Again, if you want to find out more about what Kit is doing, please go ahead and find her on the website that I just put into the chat box below. Also, if you'd like to connect with the Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership, I'm also going to put my email address into the chat box. So feel free to email me and I can hook you up with, our newsletter that goes out quarterly. I'm going to paste in the web link for our YouTube channel for all of these great recordings. So this session is being recorded. If you'd like to rewatch any of the content and or share it with your friends, it'll be up in a few days on the link that I've pasted into the chat box there. And then finally, I'm going to paste in just some quick information about our next session coming up in our series, Lean Into Your Faith. The next session is going to be held on October 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Miss Afifa Saeed is going to be presenting from a Muslim perspective on prayerfully planning, using faith in the strategic planning process. And so she's very excited to share that with all of you, and we're excited to hear from her. So with that, I will close us out for the session today and just wanted to warmly thank all of our participants for joining us. And thank you again, Kit, for sharing all of your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye-bye.